Hi, I'm Peter Marshall, and in this module I'm going to provide you with a rapid understanding of the basics of what is known about perception. Behaviourist psychologists study learned perceptual skills such as picture perception. Psychodynamic psychologists are interested in perceptual defense. Psychobiologists focus upon the physiology of perception. Social psychologists study cultural influences on perceptual set, and researchers working in the Gestalt approach study the holistic nature of perception, that is, the combined influences of every aspect of the individual in their environment. Some of the aspects on which psychologists focus are whether it starts from what is out there or from what is in the head, whether it is innate or learned, perception of depth, perception of movement, perceptual constancy, perceptual set, perceptual defense, and pattern recognition. Sources of research data used in the study of perception include newborn babies, animals, illusions, and cross-cultural studies. Before looking at various approaches to the understanding of perception, let us first look at two different ways it has been defined. Psychology theorist James Gibson defined perception in terms of assembling sensations into an intelligible representation of the world. My old friend Professor Richard Gregory, however, defined it as a dynamic searching for the best interpretation of the available data. Perception involves going beyond the immediately given evidence of the senses. The difference between these two is that one sees perception as building up a complex mental image from the parts. The second one takes as a starting point the internal concept and screens external data to find the best match. Direction and flow is more or less opposite in the two models. Well, it's along these two lines of divergence that models and theories of perception have been developed. They are referred to as bottom-up and top-down approaches. In fact, three approaches can be identified: bottom-up, top-down, and combination approaches. Like other areas of psychology, the study of perception is subject to differences of belief as to whether nature or nurture is the main source. Examples of the arguments from each viewpoint are, from the nature viewpoint, that complex perceptual abilities manifest themselves in early infancy, too early to have been learned. From the nurture viewpoint, people of some primitive cultures cannot perceive pictures as images of reality. They cannot, for example, see depths in them. Bottom-up approaches start from the actual concrete reality being perceived. In the case of visual perception, this amounts to a pattern of light. One of the most prominent of the bottom-up theories is Gibson's direct perception theory. This provides that perception is simply the inflow of data from the external world. All the information necessary for us to comprehend and interact with our environment is out there and available to our senses. That is, optic flow patterns, texture gradient, linear perspective, motion parallax, context, and superimposition. I'll explain each of these in turn. Optic flow patterns refers to the way visual features of our environment appear to behave when we're moving. The centre of our focus appears to stand still. The features all around that point, however, appear to move past us, to our sides, over our heads and beneath us, at speeds decreasing as they extend outwards from the centre. Differences in texture gradients give us information about how far away from us things are. The surface of bricks, for example, will look rougher close up than they will far away. Trees in the distance tend to look smooth, as if they were painted on canvas, rather than rugged and textured, as they would appear close up. Another clue that provides information about distance is linear perspective. This is the way parallel lines appear to converge as they get further away. Looking down a long straight road, it will appear narrower in the distance than it does where you're standing. Motion parallax is another thing that gives us information about relative distance in a visual scene. It refers to the way the more distant an object, the slower its relative speed appears. When a train is moving at 100 miles an hour, the houses near the track will appear to be moving the other way at a very fast rate. Houses in the distance, however, will appear to move the other way more slowly. Context provides another clue. The further away from us subjects are, the smaller and the closer to the horizon they appear to be. Superimposition is a powerful source of data on relative distance or depth in a scene. If a tree obscures the front of a house, it tells us it is closer than the house. The major theorist of top-down approaches is Gregory. He argued that perception is a process of formulating and testing hypotheses. We make inferences about what is out there, and we use the sensory data we take in to confirm or challenge them. If the sensory data doesn't confirm the hypothesis, we reject it. And there are many rules we apply to make the inferences. They include size constancy, shape constancy, color constancy, brightness constancy, and localization constancy. People in the distance appear smaller than those in the foreground. If we didn't use a rule to make an adjustment to what appears to our retina, we would assume that all people in close proximity to us are actually larger than those far away. We know this is not true, so we use a rule that gives our perception the quality of size constancy. In other words, we will make allowances for the effect of distance. Other kinds of constancy of perception that prevail in the face of data to the contrary include, for example, the way that grass and trees in the distance have a bluish tinge, and the further into the distance they are, the bluer they appear. We don't perceive them as blue, though. We make allowances. We also make adjustments where ovals appear, when we know the actual objects are round. An example is the rim of a cup, seen on a slant. These rules for making adjustments come from expectations, habit, inference, and memory. We all know that illusions exist. Gibson's theory cannot explain them, for if perception was simply derived from sensory data, it would mean impossible things exist out there in the world. Gregory's theory can account for them, though, as hypotheses not confirmed by sensory data. 4 types of illusion can be distinguished: ambiguous figures, distortions, fictions, and paradoxical figures. Many fall into more than one category. The weaknesses of Gregory's model are that illusions persist despite awareness of their falsity. If the process is concept-led, what starts it off? How is it that we all tend to make the same kinds of perceptions? Could it be that both bottom-up and top-down approaches apply? It has indeed been argued so. Eysenck and Keene propose that bottom-up approaches are used when viewing conditions are good and top-down approaches when they're not. The most well-worked-out model of a combination approach is perhaps NICE's analysis by synthesis model. Here, perception is a cyclical process. Hypotheses formulated in the mind lead to the search for relevant data to confirm them. This leads to additional data which has not been deliberately sought out, and this has to be analysed. This may lead to modification of the hypotheses, and so the cycle goes on. Putting aside the issue of whether the process flows from the sensory data to the mind, vice versa, or both, let us consider how we recognise objects for what they are. There are 3 major theories. They involve feature detection, prototypes, and template matching. Feature detection theories provide that objects comprise a number of basic features, including points, straight lines, and curves. Simple, complex, and hypercomplex cortical cells have been identified, which it is thought may be feature detectors. There are challenges to the feature detection approach. Feature detection is essentially a serial process, yet it is known that visual processing involves a considerable amount of parallel processing. Prototype explanations assume that we store prototypical elements of a pattern. We recognize these and combine them to perceive the full pattern. Biderman's recognition by components model provides that we hold 24 primitive shapes. He refers to these as geons, a term derived from the idea of geometrical ions. From these we construct and recognize more complex shapes. The template matching hypothesis suggests that everything we have experienced in the past becomes a template for matching objects and situations in the future. The problem is that for this to be true, we would have to store so many templates we would have no room left in our brains. Marr set out to explain the entire process of perception from the intake of light upon the retina to the meaningful comprehension of the scene in the mind. He argued that it's necessary to study 3 levels of processing: tasks and methods, sub-processes and representations involved, and neurological processes. To Marr, the primary process of seeing is to determine the shape of an object. His studies led him to conclude that there are 4 stages to this: capturing the image on the retina, identification of boundaries, and configuration of subparts into the overall shape, identification of direct clues to depth in the shape, and comprehension as a 3-dimensional object. We do not perceive everything that presents itself to our senses. If we did, our system would overload and we would simply be confused by it all. We select out certain features to perceive, and these are the elements of our perceptual set. Perceptual set is not only a selector, but an interpreter too. It determines the way we will interpret things that present themselves to our senses. The precise nature of an individual's perceptual set is determined by a range of factors: context, culture, expense or object value, expectations based on experience, emotions, personality, instructions, training or learning, motivation, and reward and punishment. If you are hungry, you will be likely to spot food around you. If you are not, you may well overlook it. A customs officer is likely to notice things which indicate that someone might be smuggling, while the rest of us would miss such signs. This is because the officer's perceptual set has been trained to pick up such things. The more you have gained from noticing certain things, the more you are likely to notice them. Conversely, the more you have suffered from noticing things, the less you are likely to see them. This is an example of the way punishment and reward affect people's perceptual set. If you have usually found approving looks whenever you have watched people's reactions to you, you'll be more likely to include people's facial expressions in your perceptual set. In contrast, if people usually respond with disapproving looks, you are less likely to focus upon this aspect of situations. There's also a phenomenon known as perceptual defense. An individual's perceptual set seems to serve to protect the individual from the effects of negative emotional connotations of sensory data. Evidence that the perceptual set works to protect the ego has come from research that has presented subjects with neutral and taboo words, including vulgar terms. It was found that taboo words were recalled more slowly and with less accuracy than neutral words. It may not have been the recall that was problematic though, but the admission or verbalization of it. The individuals may simply have been embarrassed about saying vulgar words. If our perceptual set enables us to defend ourselves against sensory data that will be threatening though, how can it know it will be threatening before it has perceived it? Well, the idea of subception has been put forward as an answer to this. This is identification as threatening by the autonomic nervous system, which controls emotional reactions prior to perception. It is sometimes known as subliminal perception, blind sight, or just a feeling. To summarise then, at least some aspects of perception appear to be learned. Perception is affected by perceptual defense. The two main approaches to perception are known as bottom-up and top-down approaches, but it's reasonable to assume it's actually a bit of both. Bottom-up approaches cannot explain illusions. There are three main approaches to pattern recognition: feature detection, prototypes, and template matching. And the perceptual set is the selection of things we attend to. I'm Dr. Peter Marshall, author of Introduction to Psychology, and I hope you found this helpful and that you'll subscribe to the channel by pressing the subscribe button. Subscription is free, and it'll help us to provide more of these to help you in your studies and career. I hope you will join me for the next module in this series, which will focus on memory. Full information on this and all my other books and publications can be found on my website, drpetermarshall.com. You can also access my many articles and advice designed to help you in your career by following me on LinkedIn by using the link linkedin/in/Dr. Peter Marshall, and a full account and explanation of my own professional development in weekly installments by following me on facebook.com/drpeter.marshall.35, and please don't forget to press the subscribe button.